think we're up to Tes Amud Aleph.
We were up to yes, that's right. We were Tes Amud Aleph. That's right. I think we're up to Omer Avasi.
Yeah.
We're up to Omer Avasi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 lines. Yeah, 8 lines where it gets wide. There we are. After it gets wide, yeah. Yeah. So we're talking about the context. The context is that we're talking about. We're coming on from a Mishnah. Effectively, we quoted a Mishnah in Peah, and the Mishnah says there's minimum amounts that you have to give and you have to provide, depending on how long he stays and what he stays there, and whatever. Even someone who goes, we said there are sort of 2 ways that an Oni can go about his business. He can either go and rely entirely on the central funds, the stock of funds of the city or the kid or whatever, or he can go and go as a freelancer and go off collecting himself. But either way, they provide at least something to give him sort of to show that he's genuine. That he's a genuine Oni. But you do see that we're discussing the idea effectively of minimum amounts. So in that context, the Gemora now brings this fascinating statement of Ravasi. Amar Ravasi la'olam, in truth, in reality, forever, always. Person must never give less than 1/3 of a shekel per year. We establish for ourselves mitzvahs. It's a pasuk in Nehemiah. We establish for ourselves mitzvahs to place upon ourselves 1/3 of a shekel a year, 1/3 of a shekel a year to the service of the Beis Elokeinu, the service of Hashem, of the house of Hashem. So, yeah. Now there's no right. That's right. Now there's no Rashi. There's no Rashi on this at all, and the next statement is another separate statement of Ravasi about how great tzedakah is. But this little piece of Gemara is fascinating. Where does it come from? What's the 1/3 of a shekel? What's a shlishis hashekel? Where does that come? So you bring a pasuk, and the pasuk is the context of the Beis Hamikdash. Already you see Tosfos, yeah, the very, very last line in Tosfos, at the bottom of the Omid, right? Shneimah v'hamideinu olinu mitzvahs v'avogav l'haikra gam Beis Elokeinu k'sev v'dainu bedek abayis. Even though this pasuk is talking about the Beis Elokeinu, the house of Hashem, which is the Bedek Habayis, is the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, everything it needs. There's 2 things, obviously. There's Bedek Habayis and there's Korbanos. Bedek Habayis is everything the Beis Hamikdash needs for its upkeep. Kol shekein tzedakah, right? How much more so is tzedakah. But it seems a bit of it's a weak connection in as such. And also, we need to understand a little bit more about the context of this, what this 1/3 of a shekel is. So we just take a quick look at the Maharsha. If you have at the back of your Gemaras, if you have addition, if you don't, then don't worry, as we'll try and say it aloud. So the Maharsha, I think, is in Chidushei Agodos. 1 second. Where's the Maharsha? Yeah. Right. Yes, that's right. So the Maharsha is on Gimel Amud Aleph in the Dafim of the Maharsha, and it's at the end, the very bottom of the first column. I don't know if you can see that where that is. So it's Daf Tes Amud Aleph. The Maharsha has Chidushei Halachos and Chidushei Agodos. So the larger print is in the standard edition of the Maharsha is his Chidushim on the Halacha sections of the Gemara, and the Agadate has Chidushei Agodos, which is the smaller print, and it's in the Chidushei Agodos, and it's just very, very short, 1.5 lines. He says, can you see that? Right at the bottom, right? Have you got that? Can you find it? Yeah, you got it? So he says, even though with regards to korbanos you require half a shekel, because that's the obvious question, right? What we know is machatzis hashekel. What's this 1/3 of a shekel? Right? Says here that tzedakah is more comparable to the kedushas bedek habayis, the kedushas domim, which is a monetary thing. If you sanctify something to the Beis Hamikdash to be used for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, then it's the money. It's effectively a gift of money. They use the money. That's what they use it for. The sagi b'shlish shekel, and it's enough for the 1/3 of a shekel. The 1/3 of a shekel. There is something else. So that's what he says. That's what he says. In other words, the idea is the Maharsha is saying that tzedakah is more comparable to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash than korbanos. Korbanos is effectively kedushas haguf. It's where the item itself is sanctified. Bedek habayis, the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, is a monetary gift, and because of that, tzedakah, that's closer to tzedakah. But there is another fascinating shot of the Ritva. The Ritva says that in fact the shlishis hashekel is actually the machatzis hashekel. That's what it is. But it's simply that they increased. They increased. We know that the values changed. There's various Gemoras in Shas about how the amounts changed and they added on, and sifu shtus, they added on certain amounts or whatever. So the point is that by the time you get to the posuk which is brought for the Zmana in the Novi, where it is in Nehemiah. It's actually Nehemiah, where it's a third of a shekel. They had the shekel was larger than the shekel of the time of the Torah. And therefore, the third of the shekel was equal to the chatzi shekel in the time of the Torah. Yeah. So that's a very, very interesting shot, because it means that if you like, it fits it better. We did this idea of a third of a shekel. It's a new idea. It's actually the same as the machas shekel. But it also says this idea of la'olam always is even if there are no aniyim in the city, okay, you have to give it to the aniyim of another city to fulfill the chiyuv of this third of a shekel per year. Yeah. Yeah. And there are various other in Yonim Shittas ideas about how much to give. But really, what this Gemora fundamentally brings out, and there's a Rambam. In fact, the Rambam says in Matnas Aniyim, Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, that if you give less than this amount, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. The Shulchan Aruch says Lukia mitzvah tzedakah. Okay, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah. And the idea is, interestingly, the Shach says that's the reason why the minhag is, that's where the minhag comes from, that the Gaboim go around in shul collecting. Why? Because even if a person would give the tiniest matbea, tiniest coin, okay, eventually he's going to at least give a third of a shekel per year, right? And hopefully a little bit more. But I think that in a hashkafa sense, what this, that seems to be the halacha, right? The absolute minimum. But really what this also brings out, I think, is the central dilemma and the issue that we have with tzedakah, right? Because it seems to be like what you would call a mitzvah kiyumis. If you do it, then you fulfill a mitzvah. But where's the basic chiyuv? What am I absolutely obligated to give? So you're going to start talking to me about Maisa. Maisa is a different thing. And there's a whole question about Maisa itself, like how that works, whether that's how that works, a person is accepted, whether it becomes a chiyuv or not. It's a different parasha, right? We're talking here about the mitzvah of tzedakah. It's not that isn't tzedakah as well, right? But it's just a different area, it's a different subject area. So I just think this is this really raises this question of what is the absolute minimum that seems to be a chiyuv. And it could be that if a person would end up giving less than this per year, then they've neglected the mitzvah of tzedakah. That's the point. Any questions on this? Any thoughts?
How does it compare to the mitzvah of Matanos Leviyonim and Purim? What's the minimum there?
So that we know is to provide for two aniyim. And there is a machlokas there as to what that means. Does it mean you can give the minimum? Some shittas hold, I think it's even as much as like a pruta for each oni, right? The smallest amount. And others say, there are a number of poskim who say it's got to be something with which the oni could buy a basic meal, right? If the whole idea is that the oni is supposed to use it for Sudas Purim. By the way, they're not chayav to. The Oni doesn't have to spend it on Purim. The Oni can decide what he wants to use the money for, but the chiyuv, our chiyuv, is to give the Oni so that he has for Sudas Purim, right? They can decide if they don't want to use it all on Purim. But that's again a separate mitzvah, right? Matanos Leviyonim has its own. It's all tzedakah, right? This is why tzedakah is so complicated, yeah.
So if you gave Matanos Leviyonim, you wouldn't be potter from the mitzvah of tzedakah in this situation.
So it seems, exactly. This shlishis hashekel bashana seems to be distinct from Matanos Leviyonim. Although that's a good point. I mean, why not? Why should you not fulfill both? Two birds with one stone. Because everyone's got to give matanos levyonim, except if there, as I said, it could be their opinions that can be even less. Matanos. It's interesting. Yeah, I think there's definitely many opinions that hold that you should give at least an amount that with which you can buy a minimal suda with. I think so.
So our concept of giving a tenth, is that Seichel Lamasa, but it clearly doesn't come from Gemora.
So again, there's a whole thing about where it comes from. Again, in this, where's that sefer I was using before? In this sefer, sorry, I have a pile of Sforim here, which is a combination of Pesach Sforim, of Basra Sforim, Stocker Sforim. It's all over the place now.
It's off screen, we can't see it.
What was that?
I said it's off screen, we can't see it.
No, it's genuine, honest. But this sefer, which I mentioned before, Hilchos Stocker Mishpat, so he's got the whole piece here, Ma'aseh Ksofim, and where that comes from, and the central issue about Ma'aseh Ksofim. The question is, where does it, where exactly does it exactly come from? There's a Torah. The Torah says, it talks about Ma'aseh Oni giving to Aniyim. And he goes, it talks about, and then he says, he brings a machlokas. Some say Ma'aseh Ksofim is min haTorah. He brings various opinions that hold it's min haTorah. Some say Ishem is only in the Drabonon, but it's a chi of Gomor. And some say it's neither midrabanon nor min haTorah. It's a minhag shel mitzvah. And this is where it's very, very complicated. There's a huge amount of discussion exactly where it comes from. If you do it, then it's like a neder. So everyone agrees that one who does do Ma'aser, one who does give Ma'aser should say bli neder for that reason, right? It shouldn't be a neder. So
as in year to year.
It seems to be where he brings it here. Yeah. Now, in other words, to avoid the problem of it becoming a neder is to say bli neder when one gives Ma'aseh Ksofim, and he brings here the Achronim. The conclusion of the Achronim, the maskon of the Achronim, is that lahalach it's not a formal chiyuv. Because in many, they talk about a situation where a person can make a condition that he will do such and such a thing. But nevertheless, it's certainly the issue is if a person accepts it upon themselves, then it becomes like a chiyuv. That's it's a very complicated piece. The whole question about mice and how it works, and the idea being once you've done it, it becomes a chiyuv. And also, what does that mean? Also, there's not a chayv gomer, a strict chiyuv. Just think if he brings. See, the Torah brings a whole lot of halachas about Ma'aseh Ksofim, which the Ramah doesn't bring. So that already creates all sorts of problems. And the Torah lists a whole lot of halachas about this. What you do with it, it's Ma'aseh Oni, give it to the Ani, this whole thing, So there you are. Anyway, we won't have time to go through it all now, but this is a separate thing. So anyway, this is this idea of Shlishis HaShekel. I mean, the biggest questions which normally arise about Ma'aseh Ksofim, about the Mo'alei Ma'aseh, people generally is what you can use it for, right? That's a whole big question as well. Well, what can you use? What can you use those funds for? But here we're talking about minimal chiyuv tzedakah. So the Gemara carries on. Simon Godel Mikdash Moshe Shomer Belaza Godel Hamaasa Yosem and Oisa. Sorry, I missed out a line. Ba'amar Ravasi Shkula tzedakah kenen kol mitzvahs. Ravasi tzedakah is equal. It corresponds to all mitzvahs. Shnei posuk v'amedeinu alinu mitzvahs to go with the same posuk we just brought. We establish upon ourselves mitzvahs. Mitzvah is kind of mitzvahs in the plural, right? It's a plural. So you see that tzedakah is equal to all mitzvahs in the Torah. And this tells you how important it is. But there's another thing now the Gemara brings. Simon Godel Mikdash Moshe, which Amar Belaz says, Godel Hamaaser Yosem and Ha'osa. Someone who causes others, Ma'aser, someone who causes others to give, is greater than the person who does it themselves. Shnei the pasuk says, V'hoya Ma'aser Tzedakah Shalom, V'avodas Tzedakah Hashkid Ovetach Adolam. So it says that the Maisa of tzedakah is peace, and the Avodas tzedakah, the service of tzedakah, is tranquility and bitachon ad olam forever. And it carries on and says, Zoch, if a person, if he merits, Halu pros l'rav lachmecho, spread out for the poor, then you'll spread out for the poor, for the hungry, your bread. But lo zoch, if a person doesn't merit, what happens is, va'aniyim merudim tovi bias. Aniyim merudim, if you look at Rashi says, we'll just see these few. Rashi's maset tzedakah torach ma'asem es chavereim. Those, if you like, the trouble of those who go lead others to give tzedakah. That's what Ma'aseh tzedakah is, and the inference and the way we understand the pasuk like that is midoloi kasiv v'hoya sahat tzedakah shalom. It doesn't say that tzedakah will be peace, right? The tzedakah will be peace. It says Ma'aseh tzedakah, the one who causes others to do tzedakah. That's how we understand it, and it seems to be that the pshat is that shalom is a higher level, right? So the Ma'aseh tzedakah is a higher level. That shalom, it seems to be is a higher level than this hashgate rovetach ad olam. I think that's how the Gemora is inferring it from the pasuk, right? You've got the highest level of it is the Maaseh tzedakah. Now, the Gemara Rashi carries on, Zochel Mazel Tov, person who is Zocha to Mazel Tov, good fortune, Aniyim Merudim Zumem Sheles Romi. Who are the Aniyim Merudim? The Aniyim Merudim are those the Roman rulers, Shetzoekes Tomid Havu Sha'onu Tzrichin. They always want more. Rashi explains what the word merudim is in the next Rashi, complaint belaz, which we don't have to work very hard to work out what that word is in Old French. They're complaining. The idea is that they're complaining in the sense that they are always demanding and wanting more. Let's just see one more line in the Gemara. If we try and understand this, Amaru Rav said to them, Amaru Rav l'bnei Mechuzah, Rav said to bnei Mechuzah, b'matusu minaychu, I request of you, please, Osu b'hadi adodi, convince each other to give tzedakah. So you should have shalom in the malchus in the king. You want to have peace in the malchus. You want to make sure you don't get oppressed by the Romans. Convince each other to give tzedakah, to do tzedakah. Convince each other to do tzedakah. So the big question here is, like I said, I think that's the way you understand how the Gemara understands it from the pasuk. That Maaseh tzedakah is greater. The idea of it brings shalom, right? But the big question here is why? Everywhere else in the Torah, right? What do we say? Mitzvah bo yosem b'shluchai, right? You know, the greatest thing you do yourself. Why is it here with tzedakah we emphasize the fact that causing others to do a mitzvah is greater than even doing the mitzvah yourself? Any thoughts?
Mezakes Rabim.
Was that Mezakes Rabim? Yeah, Mezakes Rabim. Mezakes Rabim. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But there's it still
It's
seems
also a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Fundraising is the most difficult thing to do.
That's right. The fundraising. That's right. And don't worry, on the next onward, we're going to get to charity campaigns. Hold on a minute. But at the moment, we're, just on the idea of, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. Fundraising is fundamentally difficult anyway. But I tell you, there's a fascinating Maharal here. And the Maharal says, Pshat in this Gemora, he says something very, very beautiful. He says that fundamentally, tzedakah is an act which is lifnim mishuras adin. It comes back to what I said before, right? The central issue you have with tzedakah is that it's hard to pin down the chiyuv. It's hard to pin it down. What is the minimal chiyuv? The whole essence of tzedakah, the way we even translate the word, right, is that it's lifnim mishuras adin. I don't have to do it. I don't have to do it.
Exactly, I don't have to do it.
I'm glad that there's no. I'm glad that
Who was that? It wasn't someone on the
No. Backing it up. There we go.
That was Miri.
Yeah, but she's got to hear it's fine. She's got to hear the end of the sentence. It's fine, right? The basic is that fundamentally, it's hard to pin down exactly what the formal chiyuv is. But the fact is that tzedakah, by definition, the very fact that it's something which is lifnim mishuras adin means that it is something which creates the greatest possible shalom, the greatest possible peace. Because what is peace? What is shalom? When do you have a peaceful situation? When people are mevata. That's what mevata means. Yeah, you mevata means. I don't hold by my formal line. You know what I mean? That's the essence. How do you create a situation of shalom, right? Shalom, by definition, only happens when people are prepared to give in. People are prepared to say, listen, I know that I can demand X, Y, Z, right? I know that I can. I know that I'm probably right. And it's within my rights to demand, right? But I also know that if I always hold to what I am strictly entitled to, what I can, Yikov Hadin Sahar, the din enables me to demand this, etc., then there will never be shalom. There will be machlokas, and I'll be left in a worse situation because I'll have the machlokas. So the point is that if a person leads others to give tzedakah, what do? You ferment shalom. That's what you do. Because you ferment an attitude of being mavata, of giving when you're not strictly obligated to do, wherever people are working at the level of lifnim meshura sadin. You with me? They're not working on the level of din. They're working beyond. They're working within. There's no din. I'm not chayav it's strictly speaking, but I'm working on operating on a level beyond that. And says the Maharal, to read you a few lines, he says like this, beautiful idea. He says machlokas and working lifnim meshura sadin are like two sides of the same coin. They're the opposites of each other, direct opposite. Lifnim meshura sadin is the opposite of machlokas. It's the counterpoint to machlokas. Ki ba'al machlokas, someone who is a ba'al machlokas, eina nichnas lifnim meshura sadin. He will never operate lifnim meshura sadin because he ferments machlokas, right? Uma midvarav ala din legamre. He always stands up and says, "No, this is the din." Says the Maharal in his Chidush Agodas, he says when you force, so to speak, convince others to do tzedakah, which is lifnim meshura sadin, achnim so lifnim meshura sadin legamre, that creates complete shalom. And even b'malchus, even with the king, the ruling parties as well, even though the way with them is always that there's always machlokas, there's no vita, there's no giving, there's no being mavata. Nevertheless, he says like this, he says that you can create, it has such an impact that it can even impact on creating shalom in the ruling party or whatever, as we see it even affect in terms of the Romans. But it's a very, very powerful Maharal, very beautiful idea that the convincing others to do tzedakah is so powerful and is so great that it's even considered to be greater than one who actually performs the mitzvah of tzedakah because it is the thing which creates shalom. It convinces others not to stick to the strict letter of the law and turn to be mavata towards other people. Yeah.
Is there a relationship?
Go on.
Sorry, Robbie.
No, please.
Sorry, I was just going to ask: is there a relationship between the fact that we just learned about the shlish of the shekel and that now that we're quoting this, and based on the Maharal, which basically means anything that I give over a shlish is lifnim meshura sadin?
Look, I think, as I said, like there are different ways to understand that, and I already said, for example, a good example was that discussion we just had about Maisa, right? So you see major machlokas rishonim ranging from chiyuv min Torah to not even a chiyuv midrabanon, but if you do it, it becomes a chiyuv. There's a whole so there is a massive machlokas here about that, right? But I do think that there definitely does seem to be a connection to the previous Gemora. I agree with you in the sense that we're establishing, as the Gemora so often does, the extreme parameters. So minimal, which is a very, very tiny amount, right? Therefore, because most tzedakah that people are giving is actually lifnim meshura sadin. It's not actually something they're obligated to give. I think it does. I think it fits very, very, very well with the previous line in the Gemara. I think that's right. I agree with that. Sorry,
Avrami, go on.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say that the mitzvah of tzedakah to a certain extent is equivalent to a certain extent to a mace mitzvah, where the mace in itself has no way of being able to repay the help that is given. So tzedakah here, you don't know who the recipient is, and as a recipient of tzedakah, in whichever way, they have no way of being able to give thanks or repay or whatever. And the idea should be that as you are a beneficiary of tzedakah, so you you pay it forward to a certain extent. Someone helps you, so you help the next person, and those people are sort of unknown because there's no way per se that who's the beneficiary of the money that you're giving to stocker.
Right. You're saying, yeah, no, absolutely. You're saying that the stocker done properly, almost like in its best form, there is no knowledge of who ideally either the nosin or there's both ways around. That's the best way. It's not always possible. That's the best way. And in that way it is, absolutely. Yeah, it's like chesed shalemes. Yeah, in that way it is. Yeah, absolutely.
So just to be clear, Rabbi, when you say you're not obligated to give stock, what happened to the issue of Meiser?
That's what we mentioned. So we mentioned that there is an issue of Meiser.
Yeah.
But the question is that with Meiser itself, there's a very big machlokas whether it is a formal chiyuv or not, whether it becomes a chiyuv when you actually do it. It's not clear cut. It's not clear cut. And it's also a slightly different topic. It's a different subject. Of course, it's all stocker, right? But the question is that you might that's to do with Meiser. It's a question of Meiser, connected to Meiser Oni. It's a different, Meiser Ksofim, giving money from your monetary income is learned from the concept of Meiser Oni, right? Which was given, you know what I mean? So it's a different, slightly different track to the basic conversation about stocker, right?
I see.
Richie, sorry, what did you want to say? You had something?
I presume here we're talking about tzedakah, meaning tzedakah to aniyim. That doesn't cover what we call in the wider sense tzedakah, support of schools, mikvahs, shuls. The Gemara seems to be, okay, there's been a bedek bias here, but most of the references are tzedakah to aniyim. Do you think the Maharal's comments would apply to what we colloquially call tzedakah?
It's interesting that I don't. No, but there are different ways of fulfilling the mitzvah of tzedakah, and there are different levels of tzedakah as well, right? It doesn't mean that you can't, fulfill tzedakah. Why would you say that's not tzedakah to give to?
I'm just asking. Only because the Gemara keeps on mentioning. Maybe that's what, at the time of the Gemara, that's what tzedakah was. But does the if you raise money for a school or for a shul, does the same bracha that the Gemara's just mentioned?
Yeah.
I mean, because the logic doesn't apply. I mean, using the Maharal's logic, right? You're bringing shalom. You're not bringing shalom to the same extent. You're not being.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm asking. I'm just trying to understand it.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's a good point. How does that fit in? How do other funds and other things, if you like, fit in? I know there was a whole question, and there is that question raised about, for example, there are all sorts of things that people raise money for. In a way, a school is easier, right? For chinuch of children and whatever. But there are other things people raise money for where there are questions, and is that considered to be formally tzedakah? It might be a mitzvah, a good thing, but is it formally tzedakah? It's a good, it's a fair point. It's probably a different subject in and of itself, and maybe we'll come to something. Maybe we'll come to certain things that will enable us to learn something about it. Yeah. I mean, we saw before about, for example, using money for pigeon shvuyim and things like that, right? So these are not formally aniyim, but these are for other purposes. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Should we carry on? So, let's carry on. Right. Amr Belozo. Bizman Beis Hamikdash Chaim. Bizman Beis Hamikdash Chaim. 3 lines from the bottom of the Amud. When the Beis Hamikdash was standing, Chaim Adam Shekel Miskapeloi. A person would give a shekel and you get a kapara. Achshav now Shem Beis Hamikdash Chaim. Now the Beis Hamikdash not standing. Most in stocker mutter. They did stocker. That's good. Bim lav. And if not, boy have to come. No Mizraya. Then the goyim will take it anyway. But I think and even so, it's even worse because. Nechshav lohen lit stocker. It's considered for them as if it's stocker. Shnema, as the Pasuk says, v'noiksaich, those who oppress you, tzedakah, it's charity. So it's like it's doubly bad, right? That if we don't give tzedakah, then we lose the money anyway in the wrong way, and it's like almost it's considered they've done the mitzvah of tzedakah by taking the money away. So it's bad from all perspectives. So it's essential, and it brings a kapara in that sense as well. I think there is a a connection here to the idea of the fact that in the absence of the Mizbeach, so the Shulchan of a person, you know this idea, right? The Shulchan is a kapara, the mitzvahs we do through the Shulchan, through inviting Aniyim, through the whole idea here is the same, I think, idea, the idea that that it provides kapara in and of itself. Amar Rava says, Hi Milsa, this matter is shtoili ulam shagish archse de'imei. This individual, this Rav, Rashi learns it's Rav Sheshes, was called the one who confused the normal and he's caused his mother to act in an abnormal way. That's what he was called by that name because of a story that the Gemora is going to bring a bit later on. Anyway, he told me this, Mishmeid Rabbi Loza, in the name of Rabbi Loza. If you just look at that last Rashi on the previous Omad, he explains what the Gemora means here. Rav Sheshes this, Oilal is like a youngster, who caused his mother to act in a strange manner. Shegoram lo lahatos anoshim. Come on, he caused her to go move away, or lisbazos, to become disgraced from the normal way of women. Because the Kama was going to explain later on. But anyway, he called him that name, and he said to him, he told me this. He says, Mishmei, Rava says, Mishmei Rabbi Loza, then Rabbi Loza. Maidich said, what does it mean when it says in the pasuk, the Yilbash tzedakah, and he will wear tzedakah kashirion. Kashirion is like a chain mail, like mail, right? This means, it tells you, Mashirayan zeh, just like this chain mail called klipom, it's tarefes l'shiron gadol. So each little piece on it, each little a clipper is like a shell, but it's like each little piece of metal in it. Mitzarefes l'shirin gadol, right? It joins up for one together. It makes the chainmail. It protects you from the arrow. After tzedakah, so you do tzedakah called pruta mitzarefes l'cheshbon gadol. Every little pruta adds up to one large cheshbon. One large cheshbon. Rashi says meshagish loshem muhuma v'shigon, confusion, and clipper is male or balaz, that's the male, right, chainmail. And the Gemara carries on and brings the same thing from Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina, or same idea, you learn it from here. It says, idim kol tzid koi seinu, like a garment of, it means, idim kol tzid koi seinu, so the, it literally means to remove, I think. Kol beged idim kol tzid koi seinu, ma beged zeh, kol nimo v'nimo mitzarefes lebeged godol. Just like a removal as in something unclean. So it's a garment that a person would take off, in other words, because it's not clean. So the pasuk is critical, is criticizing Klal Yisrael. It's saying that that because they were so wicked, so therefore even though things they had done, the positive things they have done, the tzidkus they have done, is like it's almost like an unpleasant and unclean garment. But the point the Gemora is taking out is like this: just like a garment, every thread joins together to one large garment. Every coin joins together for one large cheshbon. Let's see Rashi on this. Top of the Omer, Klem means to say, Af kol tzidko seinu nimasu machmas v'sheinu. Also, all our righteousness has become despised because of our wickedness. Kebeged mos, like a despised garment, sheha'odam asira me'olav, that a person removes from himself. And idim is because vayosar v'edi means to we translate the word vayosar means to remove. V'chein ma'ad beged v'yimkar brings a pasuk in Mishlei the same idea. Nevertheless, makish tzedakah lebeged. And either way, we see the comparison of tzedakah to a garment. The righteousness of the tzaddikim is like a fitting garment. This pasuk is talking about how, because of their wickedness, it was like an unclean garment. But the concept of comparing it to a beged, of tzedakah to a beged, is in that pasuk. So like I said, this is the source for crowdfunding. Whenever next time someone wants to know where you see in the Gemora that charity campaigns work, there you are. Over Basra, top of Daf Tes Omid base. But
charity, they should have it on their website.
They should really, shouldn't they? Yes. They're a company in Australia, so you can phone them up and tell them that they that's what they should do. Yeah. Now the thing is like this. So again, there's a Maharal here, an important Maharal to explain what the significance of this is. The Maharal says like this: Pirish dova zeki kasher ha'adam osa mitzvah zos mitzvah yichidis kasher osa od mitzvah yigam kin yichidis. Generally with mitzvahs, every mitzvah stands in its own right. Ve'ein beis ha-mitzvahs mitztarefes li'os mitzvah achas gedola. The mitzvahs don't join together to create one large mitzvah. Okay? Rakim shnei mitzvahs. They're two mitzvahs. Aval hat-tzedakah eino kach. Tzedakah is different. If you give a pruta today and a pruta tomorrow, and eventually adds up to 1,000 zuhuvim, Eitzel Hashem Yisparach einu nechshav shenosen kach v'kach prutos, rak Eitzel Hashem Yisparach nechshav ki osa tzedakah gedol 1,000 zuhuvim. Hashem looks at it as if you've given a tzedakah worth 1,000 zuhuvim. Ki tzedakah mitzterefes lecheshbon gadol, because tzedakah joins together for one large cheshbon. And he says, this is specific and unique to tzedakah. Shemu mitzvahs lulav. If you do the mitzvah of lulav, right? The mitzvah is to do it once a day. That's what you do with lulav, right? There are mitzvahs that you can fulfill all the time if you want, right? On a constant basis. For example, you can make a dough, right? Every half an hour you can make another dough and take challah. You fulfill the mitzvah. You can do that. In kol ze'ein kan siruf, you're not joining together. You can't join together two distinct mitzvahs and make them one. If you do mitzvah of challah now, and in half an hour's time another mitzvah of challah, you've got two mitzvahs. You don't have one mitzvah. You don't have one large mitzvah. And then he goes into the question of whether it's better or it's better to give it in bits, because then it's separate mitzvahs each time. But he says no. He says on the contrary, he says you can add, even if you give it bit by bit, it joins together. Kol shekain if you're going to give a lot in one go. But it seems to be the way the Maharal is understanding it. There's some specific idea with tzedakah that the individual things you do join up together to make one specific cheshbon. Yeah. In which case, either way the Maharal is understanding it, it's more of a focus on one person. That's the way he's understanding it. You're doing this mitzvah, although I think it's not a contradiction to understand it on a broader sense as well. Yeah, that's what he says. Okay, so the Gemora now carries on.
But is that reality just with tzedakah or with any mitzvah of chesed? And I think about Rosh Hashanah time, when we stand there together as Klal Yisrael,
right,
where you kind of amass together your chasodim as a nation.
So go on, how?
So the point I'm making, I'm not sure. Again, my question is specifically like this: Is this specifically something unique in giving money of tzedakah, or is it something unique in chasodim?
That's interesting. Yeah. Is it a chesed thing, or is it tzedakah, or is it specific to tzedakah? How would you understand it with chasodim? I'm saying, like, if I do a chesed, if I help
I think about gift. Let's just use gift as a really easy example. You know, the local, gift who food packages and parcels and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That's accumulation of different volunteers and different people and different helping. You're right. Each one is helping that guy and helping that guy, but together we're helping as a kehillah. Right.
But that's interesting. So why? Yeah. And how do you want to make that into a? You want to say just the same thing as a cheshbon gadol?
Yeah. I've got a foundation.
That's tzedakah, Martin. Martin, gift is tzedakah. It's the same thing, isn't it? What's the difference between gift and any other tzedakah?
So that's part of my question. Is it a distinction about giving money, or is it a distinction of doing chesed? Because gift is also people volunteering their hours and packing and shopping for people, running errands. That's maybe now is not the time for this.
No, it's a good point. I'm not sure. It depends whether you understand it as a monetary thing. Just seeing here that there are some Rishonim, for example, who say, the Meiri says, for example, that this Gemora is mechadesh something lahalocha. That even we said before, you have to give the shlishas hashekel, but it doesn't have to be in one go. So if you give it throughout the year, it all joins together, right? Like we said, So it could be this is specific because it's telling you about monetary things specifically, that it can all join together when you make a cheshbon because it's money, So then it might be specific to that. might be specific to that. Yeah, but it's a fair point. Okay.
Can you
So-
learn anything from that? Whether any guidance then as to whether it's better to give small amounts to larger numbers of stockers?
Yeah, that's a different
large
question.
amounts?
That's a
Is
different
that-
question.
right, you can't infer anything from this.
No,
Right.
that's a well-known issue.
The question again, Richie?
Where are you better off? Let's say you've got £1,000 to give, or are you better off giving 100 stockers £10 each, or are you better off
Yes.
giving one stocker?
No, I can tell you the answer. The answer is 100 times 10, because you get into the way of giving, it becomes easier for you. Well, I remember we learned that once at a Generation Sinai thing from Noah.
No, it could well be. I think
Because you as a giver,
Yeah,
right?
Yes, because if you think about it, there's a sort of inherent block to each time you give money for tzedakah, and if you do it 100 times, you're knocking down that block. You're making it easier for yourself you're becoming more used to just giving.
Personally, I've got a bigger block giving £1,000 than I've got giving £10.
No, but 100 times 10, it's the equivalent. If you're giving 100 times,
right. Yeah.
yeah. So this is he brings here in the Biurim in the Masifta edition. He brings a lot of different different ideas. He talks about this in detail on this Gemora. He brings that. He brings a Rambam. You can infer from the Maharal the opposite. It's better to give him one large gift. There's a Maharal in Pirush, the Rambam says in Pirush HaMishnayos that it's better to give many separate smaller ones than one large one. And he says that's the pshat in the Mishnah in Ovos, v'hakoil lefi rov hamasa. The milas lo yigilu adam lefi godel ha'maisa lefi mispar ha'maisim. He understands the Mishnah hakoil lefi rov hamasa, right? The multiplication of the actions is what creates a greater zechus, which is what Jeremy is saying. I mean, Jeremy, you're coming from a perspective of it just encourages you to be a giver, which is a different issue, but also equally important. I think it's really what you're saying. It's what the Rambam's saying, Pirush HaMishnayos. Whoever told you that in Sinai, the Sinai South African event, has probably got it from the Rambam. Yeah, you've duplicated. He calls the Maisa Hanadivus, the act of being a nadiv, of giver, being a giver, right? 10 times. You've created a kinyan chozok benafsho. Yeah, a strong kinyan. And he brings a Sefer Hasidim, who makes a distinction, who says, Yochanan listen stock, Atoli Yosef Lefanis Nefesh Achas from Godel, yeah. He makes a distinction of the Sefer Hasidim, is there anyone else giving in the city, right? Because if there's other people, if there's one individual giving, maybe it's better for him to sustain one person fully rather than giving 5 and everything you give is nothing. If you're the only giver and you're going to give 5 people and none of them are going to have enough from what you're giving, maybe it's better to support one person. These are huge dilemmas in Stocker, right? But if there's other people also giving, so then everyone should give maybe to, let's say, everyone gives to the 5 people, and then they all have enough through the other people giving, right? This is how it is. Yeah, so there you go. So fascinating. All these, I told you, all these subjects. Stocker is a huge sugya. There's so much in it. But let's try and do the next piece, which is a little bit of a side track in the sense that we're just trying to understand why he called Rav Sheshes this name. And my correlate, and the Gemora therefore goes away from Stocker just for a little bit to understand this, why he called him this. My correlate, why did they call him Ola Mashagesh Archsid Ime, a young boy who disturbed the ways of his mother? Because Rav Ami asked the following question from Rav Sheshes. How do you know that a Metzora, in the days he counts, so the way the Tara process of the Metzora works is he has to bring the Tziporim, the birds, that he brings to Havas Korbanos, one is sent away in the field, the whole beginning of Parshas Metzora, and there's a 7-day count from that point until he brings his Korbanos. So how do you know that during those counting days, how do you know that he makes a person tome? We know that the days before bringing the tzipurim, it's called yemei chalutoi. So in those days, we know that there's a hekesh to a mace. Matzorah is iskash mace is compared to a hekesh to a mace, right? That he does become can make a person tome. The question is, what's his status during the yemei sipurah? That was his question he asked Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes responded, he says, since he makes his garments tome, because the Torah says by Yom Hashvi, right, the chibes begodov, it says you've got to wash his garments, so he's got to wash his clothes on the seventh day. Because of that, matame odom, he therefore also can make people tome. Omalei, Rav Aktabuya said back to Rav Sheshes, Dilmo, Tumah b'chiburim shani. Maybe tumah which he's attached to is different. In other words, the garments that he's wearing is a different status. But when it comes to garments he's not wearing, things he touches, he won't make them tome, and also he won't make tome a person he touches. How can I prove to you that tumah b'chiburim is different? That garments he's wearing is different? Or hisid nevela, someone who causes tumah to someone who causes tumah, a person who moves, not causes tumah, sorry, someone who moves an avela. Hesed is basically a way of moving an avela, and that's what hesed really means. It's a way you move it in some way. And hesed avela de matame begodim ve'ena matame adam. The halacha is it causes his garments to become tomei, his own garments, ve'ena matame adam. And it doesn't make a person tomei. A person who does this moves an avela, a carcass. The halacha is of a dead animal. The halacha is that he makes the person his own garments a tomei. The kibbutz has to wash his garments, but it does not cause a person. He doesn't make a person another person tomei. So you see that tumah b'chiburim is different. Omalei said to him, "Ve'elo sheretz dematame odom minolon." Says, "I'll prove it to you from a sheretz." Because how do you know that a sheret, a person who comes into contact with a dead rodent, one of the specific shrotzim that cause tumah, dematame odom, how do you know that he makes a person tomei? La mishum dematame begodim. Is it not because, do you not learn it from the very fact that it's matame begodim? It's the same, that's where you learn it from when it comes to a sheretz. When it comes to a sheretz, surely the source is effectively because the sheretz causes tumah to the begodim, to the garments. Therefore, the person who touches the Rashi deals with this problem because it's not really the same. It's really not. The garments that we're referring to are not being worn by they're not being worn by the garments that they're being worn by the sheretz, right? So it's slightly different. But the Rashi deals with that. Rashi says the Gemora could have asked that question, but either way, surely you can prove that the only way we know that a sheretz causes tumah to a person is because it also is matame begodim. So the Gemora says like this. Omalei, he said back to him, Rav Aktabuya says back to Rav Sheshes, you want to prove from a sheretz that just like a sheretz is matame begodim, so to a sheretz is also matame odom, and you want to say that's the same thing with a matzorah in the days of his counting. Omalei sheretz bedru kasibei. What are you proving me from a sheretz? It says explicitly in the Torah about a sheretz. It says clearly that someone who touches a sheretz, it becomes tomei. Right? So the Torah tells me explicitly that a person who touches this dead sheretz becomes tomei. So it's not like I have to learn it from begodim. So how can you prove from there that to a matzorah, that because of matzorah, his own begodim become tomei when he's in this 7-day period, right? He can also therefore make other people tomei. It's not a proof. So he tries a different tack. He says, how do you know shichva zera? How do you know that shichva zera can matame a person? Surely you know that because since it makes begodim tomei, it makes the garments tomei, therefore it also makes a person tomei. And the Gemora says, no. The Gemora says, because the pasuk says explicitly, Rashi brings the pasuk, it says chol beged v'chol or that has the shechva zera on it becomes tomei, and therefore you'd say the same thing. It should make a person tomei as well. Surely that's where we learn from the begodim. We learn that it makes a person tomei. So we say the same thing here. Omanei said shechva zera. Again, you've got no proof from shechva zera because it says oish or a person. The word oy, the rabbi says hanogea. The word oy or includes someone who touches the shechva zera. So effectively, Rav Sheshes has failed to find it seems, a suitable source and response to this question, right? You with me? All we've done is basically he had a question. You asked him a shaila, how do I know that a person during the Matzorah, during the 7 days counting between bringing the birds and bringing his korbanos, how do you know that he can make another person Tommy? That was the question. Where's the source? And he tried to say, well, because he has to, his own garments are Tommy, therefore a person. This is not a proof. Tumah b'chiburim. You're wearing them. Totally different story. Doesn't mean he can make another person Tommy. So he tried to prove it from two other sources. He tried to prove it from Sheretz. He tried to prove it from where you have the same thing. Garments become Tommy, and therefore also a person becomes Tommy. Try to prove Shechva Zera. Both are not a proof because there, in both cases, the Torah tells me explicitly that a person becomes Tommy. But I don't have a source here that a Matzorah during those 7 days can make another human being Tommy. So Ahadalei Vadi Chusa. So he responded to him, Rav Achtubi responded to Rav Sheshes in a sort of joking sort of way because Rav Sheshes was failing to respond, to give a satisfactory answer. Rav Sheshes felt, if you like, faint. He was, it's not really faint in a fainting sense. It's more he was, I don't know, offended is also not the right word.
Distressed.
Stressed or de-stressed?
Distressed.
Yes, that's it. Distressed. That's the right word. Distressed, right? Ishtik Rav Achtubi bar Ami. Ishtik Rav Achtubi bar Ami became mute as a result of what he did to Rav Sheshes. And he forgot his learning. Now the mother, Rashi learns, it's the mother of Rav Sheshes who came to and wept for Kabach Kamei in front of Rav Sheshes. Of what he had caused, the suffering he caused to Rav Achtubi bar Ami through this incident. So she davened, she prayed, she wept, she asked that he should daven for him. Rav Sheshes should daven for Rav Achtubi to be healed. But he didn't listen to her. She said to him, see these breasts that you nursed from, see what they see, have mercy. I'm your mother. What I did for you and nursing you and nourishing you, you should at least have rachmanus on him. Bar rachme alei. He then asked davened for him, ve'itzi, and he was healed. And he was healed as a result, and he finally Rav Achtubi was healed. But so the whole story you've only brought for this incident. That's why Rav Sheshes was called a young boy, even though he wasn't really young, seems, but yeah, who disturbed the ways of his mother. His mother was so distressed over what had happened that she had to debase herself, and that's what led him to daven for Rav Achtubi bar Ami, and therefore he received this moniker of one who causes his mother to act in an inappropriate way. Okay. So the Gemora now carries on, just finishes this off with Asan Allah. Now that we're talking about it, Minolon, how do we actually know the source? What is in fact the source? How do we know what the source is for this question that he was asked? The son of the Brisa says, it says they washed his garments in the days of counting, and it says kibbutz begodim in the days when he is fully classified as a Matzorah. He is which is known as Yumei Chalutoi, when those days it's clear that he makes a person Tomei. Malalom Matame Odom, just like over there, he caused a person to become Tomei. Afkan so to here as well, Matame Odom, he can cause a person to become Tomei during Yumei Sipura. So that's the source for the question he was asked. But we brought this story to understand that why he was called that name. Yeah. Let's see Rashi on this. Rashi is B'mei Sipura is the second narrow line. b'mei sipurai, in the days of his counting, v'shivas yomim, the 7 days, shebein Toras and Tziporim of Oskorbanos. So the 7 days between bringing the birds and the purification procedure of the birds and the actual bringing of the korbanos, the days of Chaluto is lemes. It's compared to a mace, l'tami af ba'ayel. A metzora, when he's fully metzora, is compared to a mace, and he can even make things tome if they're in the same oil as him, like a mace. He said, on the 7th day, it says he washes his garments. So Rav Achdubui responded to that answer of Sheshus. You can't say that, it's no answer. Tuma b'chiburin is different. Could go big day levushay. The things he's wearing are in kamayo, they're the same as him. Well, Shaba got him, other garments, and a gerba, and somebody touches other garments, the mitzvah, v'chinim nog yiga ba'odom, touches a person, even time he won't make him tomei. Teda, he says, I'll prove it to you, Sharon. Mesit nevela, someone who causes a nevela to move ksivbe, it says with it, carries the nevela, she washes garments. We don't find that he's considered to be enough hatuma, the highest level, except for a mace, to be matame a person and other garments. So therefore he says you can't prove anything from the garments he's wearing becoming tomei. So you try to prove Shechva Zera, Shechva Zera matami begonim v'chol beged v'chol ar shiel of Shechva Zera v'gom any garments or leather which has Shechva Zera upon it. This Rashi is out of order. Shechva Zera is brought after the Sheretz, right? So the order of Rashi is reversed here. The Sheretz was brought first. This is going now on the Sheretz proof. You could have asked the question that the Tumah of Begodim is not comparable to Begodim to be Meisifuro, the garments that are that's Tumas Begodim of the Sheretz is not comparable to the Begodim during the days of his counting. The Begodim Dohocha love big day levush Sheretz. The garments here are not the garments that are worn by the Sheretz. The Tumas Magahu, it is the Tumah being touched. It's the Tumah of the Sheretz touching something. So therefore, you can't prove anything from a Sheretz. It's not the same as what he wanted to prove from the Metzora, that just like he makes the garments he's Tommy, the garments that he is wearing Tommy, therefore he also makes a person Tommy. That's a better question anyway, because it's straightforward kasha, because the Apostle tells me clearly that he makes a person Tommy. The Sheretz causes this tumah to a person. How do you know to include somebody who touches or a man? So the oy includes that. He answered him in a joking way. He was failing to answer. He became mute. Asked you, the mother of Sheshus came along. And she cried in front of him. She spelled off. He should daven for him. These breasts. Targum shel chazes, the targum of the chest. He is nursed from them, and that's what he challenged him. Interestingly, Tosfos says that it was actually the mother of Achdabuyi. Yeah, and it was him. He was called Rav Achdabuyi was called someone who caused his mother to act in a strange way. Okay, and she was actually the wet nurse of Rav Sheshus, and that's why she turned around to Rav Sheshus. It fits in a way. The Rach's Pshat fits a bit better in the sense that Rav Achdabuyi was the one who caused the whole problem, right? So he was the one who caused his. The Rabbeinu Chanal says it was Rav Achdabuyi's mother who was actually Rav Sheshus' wet nurse, and he caused his mother to have to debase herself in front of this Rav Sheshus who she had nursed, right? But he was the one who led to the whole problem by causing the laughing in the first place. Totally different pshat to Rashi. Anyway, let's just ask a few Rashis. How do you know Matame Odom? Makes a person Tomei. It says washing garments in the days of counting. In the 7th day shave all his hair. And it also says to about washing garments above on the day when he brings the birds. When he goes out of that full state of tumah, the chibes hamatzaheres begodov. He says he has to wash his garments, right? So because you put together kibbutz begodim here and kibbutz begodim there, that's how you know that just like in the case of a metzora b'mei chaluto can make a person tomei, so too a metzora in the days of the counting days between the tziporim, the 7 days between the tziporim and the bringing of the korbanos also makes a person tomei. That is the makar, and that's where we will leave it today. So in Mitzvah Hashem next week, the plan is to be back in shul, which is very, very exciting. I think it's very exciting anyway. So we will keep the Zoom link open for those uncomfortable or those for whatever reason find it difficult to come to shul. However, in the nicest and gentlest and best possible way, I do think that if you can make it, I think it's incomparable to be actually in person together as a chabura. Will be spaced out and whatever, but I think if you can make it, I think it's very special to actually be in person. It creates a great pilpul chaverim and a chabura, and as again, 100%, the Zoom will be there. Don't feel under any pressure, but if you'd like to, that would be wonderful. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you.
Take care. See you
Thank
next
you.
week. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.